Welcome to part two of our discussion. We have moved past the understanding of marketing in today's world. We have talked about some of the basic marketing concepts, and now we're going to talk about the actual actions and activities that go inside of marketing to come up and create decisions. All right? Well, Sun Tzu once said that tactics without strategy is basically a plan for failure. And what that basically meant is that if you were simply handling the things that were in front of you and were not thinking of an overall long-term concept, then in essence you were failing to plan. And if you're failing to plan, yes, that's right, you're planning to fail. All right? This is the point of what strategic planning is. Strategy is a firm's game plan for success. It is the corporation looking inward into itself, looking outward into what's going on in the world, and coming up with some form of overall grand idea, a roadmap of finding a way to achieve success based upon the powers that they have and the goods that they have. Tactical planning is really focusing on specific markets or segments and ideas in the marketing program to meet those particular needs. And so they, in essence, are the foot actions that go on day to day in order to achieve strategic success. And so if I were to just encompass the differences between strategy and tactics, I would think of two field generals by the name of Eisenhower and Patton. Both of those were unique men. Eisenhower uniquely was ranked 32nd in the chain of command of the United States during World War II, and yet he was the man that planned the Allied invasion into Europe during World War II. How did this man rise so quickly? Well, one of the reasons why is that he was an outstanding big game planner. And by that big game, I don't mean animals. I mean he could see the big board and he could plan multiple moves ahead of itself. And he was also a master at finding the right person at the right moment. Patton was a 3-star general in the United States Army. He commanded the 3rd Army, and he had enormous success in North Africa and in Italy, and ultimately was part of the 3rd Army that moved through France and ultimately saved the 101st Airborne when he was trapped at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. Patton was a great man at tactics. In other words, quite simply, tell Patton that he needed to do something and he would find his way, beg, borrow, or steal to make that happen. And so this is the difference between strategy. It is the massive overall game plan, the purpose in which you exist, and then the tactics or the individual activities and actions that go about achieving that success. And then the final part of that altogether is that the strategy is outlined in the marketing plan. And so the marketing plan is usually a formalized document, which you will be making, ultimately that spells out your roadmap to success. And so how do we go about making those plans? Well, the first thing that any good marketing individual does is they do research. Marketing does an enormous round of research, folks. Trust me, we probably do more. I can't speak to accounting and I can't speak to the others, so I shouldn't say how much they do. But all of marketing in terms of making plans starts with research, okay? And doing what we call situation analysis. So what are the things that we look at? The first is that we do an internal analysis on the performance of our corporation. We look at our own individual strengths and weaknesses, and we define the capabilities under the fact that we all live under limitations, and ultimately look at what we find is our best and worst attributes. The next is that we analyze competing businesses against us. We look at the competition, even if those competitors may not seem to be direct competitors. The failure of Microsoft on their operating system is they did not conceive that the smartphone and the iPad would be their next generation competitor, to their failure. The next is that we have an understanding of the external environment. The external environment, by the way, is much more than just simply the physical environment in which we exist. We understand the legal environment in which we're working under. We're understanding the industry in which we work in. We understand the economy in which all of those things come together. That's the kind of example that we have when it comes to analyzing the external environment. And then the last of that is we run a situation analysis in which we collect all of that information together, the internal, the competitive, and the environmental information. And given that information together is when it coalesces and we start coming out with actions and ultimately, hopefully, a long-term strategic plan. And so, what do we hope to achieve? We hope to achieve what is known as a competitive advantage. Now, all corporations in one way or another have some form of competitive advantage, even if their advantage is that they sell things at a lower price than anyone else. A competitive advantage is an advantage that your firm has over other competitors. If it's one of those things that cannot easily be replicated, it's what's known as a strategic competitive advantage. All right? The competitive advantage serves as an edge. That means that it has over its other competitors. It serves their customer needs. It helps them maintain relationships. It creates a strategic focus for the organization. So if I were to say something like Starbucks, all right? Starbucks, of course, makes a good cup of coffee, but it's more than that. I think its name is it Schultz? Yes. His important thing was that he created a third place, a unique special environment where consumers could go versus their workplace and their home and have a third place in which they could enjoy themselves. And so that's what their competitive advantage is. Now, in MBA school, folks, you might go into a management strategy class, just to let you know this. There are many MBA classes that'll tell you success is when you focus on your competitive advantage and nothing else. So what does that mean? I used to do this with my students, as I would say, name for me the factories for Nike. So in other words, how do they produce their shoes? And you'd have a discussion around with the students, and the answer is Nike doesn't own any factories. Nike's competitive advantage is shoe design and sporting apparel, and that's it. And when it comes to the production of those goods, they allow some other corporation to make it for them. And so when Nike comes up with a new shoe, what they'll do is they'll go to factories in Indonesia and China, wherever, and they will allow them to bid on making a limited run, 60 or 70,000. I don't know how many. Now, one of the unique things about Nike is they, in order to get a break on the cost, they'll say, we'll allow you to make 5,000 more of that shoe if you give me a break. Now, what they do with those 5 or 10,000 more of those shoes is they sell them to Walmart. And Walmart actually sells a Nike designed shoe, but it doesn't have the swoosh logo on it. So that's an example of maintaining your competitive advantage without doing anything else. Can you do that in the modern world? Yeah. I don't know about forever. We'll see. Forever's a long time, isn't it? Okay. In the actual day-to-day work, to be able to implement your strategies, what you have to do is certain things like market segmentation and target marketing. Now, we're going to go into these in chapters 6 and 7, if I'm not mistaken. And so we're going to go a little bit further, but this section, by the way, what we're talking about is we're talking about the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps are price, promotion, product, and place. And it's important to understand, if you notice in this slide, you don't do any of those 4 Ps until you do segmentation and targeting first. And so, without going into too much, segmentation is the identifying of consumers into similar groups, all right? And so that's the segmentation progress. And so what that basically means is that I'm looking for a shoe, a basketball shoe, but my needs are somewhat different than someone who wants a professional shoe. And so if you look at my particular needs and you combine them, you come up with a unique shoe. Another example would be a bicycle. Okay, so just think of all of the uses that you would have for a bicycle: transportation, exercise, boy and girls bicycles, each one of those, and you would define the segments there. Now the interesting thing is that if you had a bike for transportation and you had a bike for exercise, they'd pretty much be the same bike. However, you can create marketing plans for each one of these to identify after a different target, and given the marketing strategy, you could try to go after each one of those. Okay, targeting is deciding which one of these markets to go after and going to pursue them. Okay, so that's segmentation and targeting. The third is positioning, which isn't here, and that's creating a unique place in the consumer's mind relative to the competition. All right, now marketing program decisions are kind of interesting. The 4 Ps actually was first put in a book by Jerome McCartney in 1960 as the 4 levers in which a marketing manager has at his use to be able to execute the strategy that marketing comes up with. And so the program decisions, the first one of those is to create a link between the product benefits and the customer needs. In other words, a comfortable seat is a satisfaction for a consumer's need to sit at a long time. All right, pricing decisions are those prices that meets the consumer's perception of that particular good. A $50 watch may be considered excessive if it were a Timex, and if it were a Rolex, you might consider it to be a fake. All right, distribution and supply chain actually is what I teach at the undergraduate level, and believe me, my life is really good right now. I've got enough to do research on until I retire. Distribution and supply chain were once thought of as the very last things that you think of in the 4 Ps. Now they're one of the most important, I should say. The provision and efficient distribution of goods and services over a chosen consumer segment are more important than ever. I should not mention, or I should not leave out, integrated marketing communications, or IMC. The interesting thing is that if you really study marketing, IMC is usually the last thing, because all of the most important choices about how do we go about creating a unique brand, all of those things happen before we actually get into IMC. IMC is exactly what it sounds like. Of the 4 Ps, it used to be thought of as promotion, but IMC also includes social media. It includes mass media, and it also includes face-to-face, such as personal selling and even direct marketing. Okay. Now, if you noticed, I said positioning. Well, here it is. Positioning is establishing a mental image of the product in the minds of the target buyers, and it doesn't say this, but it's the truth relative to the competition. If you do not have competition, you do not have positioning. Okay? It is important also to understand that even with all of these difficult times as well, is that we must consider our social responsibility and the ethics in everything that we do. It sometimes is given a short shrift, especially at times like this, but it's important to understand that it is more important than ever. We must always consider these things to be important. Okay? Marketing ethics is the principles and standards that define what are acceptable conduct and marketing activities today, and it is something that we all should live for, that we should all be moving towards a more equitable and a more ethical standard. The last thing in terms of activities and decisions are the implementation and control. It's important to understand that just because we execute the process, it doesn't mean that it runs itself. We must constantly be controlling for the situation as things change, because ultimately, many times the things change in the middle, and if we don't keep our minds on the situation, many times those things will run out of control. And the last thing to consider, this will be the last chapter we do, is the developing and maintaining of long-term relationships. We have moved from the concept of what is known as transactional marketing, where we're just simply there to provide the goods given the price, to where we are moving towards long-term relationships to our consumer. The moment of the transactional marketing is ended. We hopefully are doing these things so that we are maintaining a long-term relationship with our customer. What that also means that you're going to see many times a different language. So instead of just acquiring the customer, which is important, we work to retain the customer. And there is a truism: it costs 4 times more to grab one new customer than it takes to retain an old customer. True story, I was in Milwaukee. This was, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe 6. And I was flying out to Dallas, and I ordered a pizza from Papa John's. And it showed up in 50 minutes. It was a Sunday night at my hotel room. And you know what it's like when the cheese is already hard. And I was disappointed. So I got on Papa John's website. I gave my ticket number, and I gave them the name of the store that it came from. And I said, I'm usually a loyal person for Papa John's. I'm sorry about this. I mean, I was hoping for something better. That very next day, I got a call from the manager of the store, and he apologized and he said, "I'm sorry, sir. It was a short group that night. We were limited in terms of individuals working. How can I make it up to you, or how can Papa John's make it up to you?" And I said, $20 gift card would be nice. The gift card was in my mailbox when I got home. So, do I go to Papa John's? You bet. All right. So anyway, all of this, hopefully what you're creating is you're creating a mutual satisfaction between you and the consumer. That you create a value, that you consider the service priority to the consumer to be high, and that there's a long-term commitment to satisfying the consumer's needs. Now, marketing strategy as it is right now is one of those things that's in a constant flux. I don't have to tell you that once again in May of 2020 to understand the constant change going on. Realize also that the people nature of marketing means is that as people change, things change. Jag Chef, who's one of the major guru of marketing, said that marketing is a context-driven field, and that as consumers change, marketing must change with it. But it's also one of those things that means that marketing is always reinventing itself. And so that's also a good thing too, okay? And so you hope to be able to evolve marketing along with society as well. Realize that consumers always have a change in expectations. We see consumers now with the need of instant gratification, and we have to find some way of being able to satisfy the customer in whatever way we can, given that we are in a market that is constantly changing, and we are living also in the realm of mature markets. And mature markets just means that many products have all similars and features, and once again we tend to think of them as commodities versus unique products. And folks, remember this: when your consumer thinks that no two products are different from each other, there's one way they make a choice: price. All right? And then finally, just remember this, is that because we're in an aggressive cost-cutting type of environment, it is one of those things in which we must always be able to anticipate change and be willing to remove those items when they're no longer of value to our consumers. Okay? Now I'm going to leave you with this customer satisfaction index, kind of give you an idea of where things were up till 2014. And if you notice, satisfaction as a general rule of thumb is on the downward trend in just about every industry. And so with satisfaction going down, with the increased commoditization of things in our market, the need for strategy is all the more important. Okay, folks, this is the end of chapter 1. Thank you very much.